Hi, my name is Shoshie Goldstein-Nissenbaum. I'm a Toenet Rabbanit, a halachic advocate, and a mediator, and welcome to my podcast, Divorcing with Dignity. Today, our guest is Rivka Leibowitz. Rivka is a certified financial planner with more than 20 years of experience in the Israeli space. She is the founder of Living Financially Smarter in Israel, a brand aimed at empowering English speakers in Israel with practical financial advice and education. And on that note, I was a client of Rivka's many years ago when I first met Aliyah. I always kept her in my mind as this fountain of knowledge and advice and educator, because you're a financial planner, but you're really an educator as well, where you educate people how the system works, how to best use their money, how to get out of debt. Rivka has successfully guided thousands of people with planning their finances in Israel. She's the founder of the 38,000 plus member Facebook group, Living Financially Smarter in Israel, and the author of the best-selling book, Smarter Israeli Banking, which I highly recommend. So today, we're going to discuss some of the financial issues that come up pre-divorce, during the divorce, and post-divorce. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the spectrum of financial situations which come up in a divorce. So you have people on the poverty end who have a couple who comes to me as a mediator, or one of the spouses comes to me for litigation, and they're on the poor end of the spectrum, meaning they have a lot of debt, little or no assets, and very low income. Okay, these are people who are struggling, might be on some government programs, even though the government programs in Israel are not really very helpful. You're talking about a very low amount of money. And then you have the people in the middle, right? You have the middle class who they're mostly making it through the month, but not always. There's definitely not enough money there to support two households, and they're struggling, okay? And then you have the other end of the spectrum, the wealth end of the spectrum, where you have a lot of assets, a lot of savings, and a lot of what to fight over, which unfortunately doesn't do anybody any good. So with that understanding that there's a big spectrum, so not all the advice that you're going to give now is going to be applicable to all of our listeners. But what we're really looking for is how to create some kind of financial stability, considering divorce, right? For most people who come to me getting divorced, they're not considering based on finances, meaning they've come to a place where they cannot live like this. But sometimes people are like, rarely, but sometimes people are like, I don't know, like, could I afford to get divorced? Could I not afford to get divorced? Those are also somewhere in the spectrum, okay? So considering all the above, okay? When somebody is considering divorce, how can they prepare themselves? Now, before you answer the question, I just want to bring in another spectrum, right? And that is people very often in marriages which fall apart or dissolve, you have one partner who knows the finances really well and the other one who's in the dark. And I actually see that it can go man-woman, meaning you have men who are completely in the dark about the financial situation. Okay, you have avrechei kollel, people who learn in kollel, their wives make all the money, the wives have the pension, the wives take care of the finances. They balance, no one really uses a checkbook anymore, but they balance the account. And then you have, on the other side, you have men who are working, and the other extreme, men who are working and their wives are taking care of the family, raising the children, and they have no clue about finances. So what do you think from a financial perspective is the first step in preparing for a divorce?
I think that both partners always, like in an ideal situation, which obviously divorce is not, need to know what's going on. Like, even if my spouse is taking care of the money, there should be, maybe a net worth statement or something where we know what accounts we have, what assets we have. And each partner should know what they have, like what their financial picture looks like. This is for couples who are getting along great, and this is for couples who are thinking of getting divorced. Like, we should always know what our financial situation is and where we have accounts. This could be helpful also, chas v'shalom, if someone passes away, and then everyone's like, oh, where's the money? So everyone should have what I call a net worth statement. It could be a list of what accounts we have and what assets we have, but people should know what we have. That's the first thing that anyone who's considering divorce and wants to know what their financial situation is going to be like, is knowing what you have. Okay. The second is to figure out, okay, this is maybe what we have, what we could split, whether it's a lot or a little. How would I support myself and possibly my kids in this situation? So we have to ask ourselves, what we could do. Do I make enough? Do I need to increase income? What steps would be taken to do that, etc. And the third was maybe create a budget for ourselves. Okay, if this couple's getting divorced, they should each be looking at what's life going to cost them pre-divorce, because it's not half of what it costs us together, because we're paying 2 rents possibly, or 2 mortgages, and maybe 2 cars and whatever. It's not half, but it's also not double. So I think creating a budget and knowing what life can cost or what you could afford, and then translate that into wherever you'd move to or rent or whatever, is key to really preparing financially for divorce.
I think that one thing that people find very difficult is realizing, and on the one hand, you can't decrease your spending. You can't take away therapy from your kids or from yourself. There's very little room to cut. And also each parent wants to make their home the good home, the fun home, right? Where there's good food and there's good toys and there's, oh, I could take you on trips, when that's not really a reality. And financial reality, let's put it that way, which I find that a lot of people will go into debt for. Now, maybe it's worth it to go into debt for therapy, because that's kind of pikuach nefesh, but I don't know if it's going into debt to make your house the fun house and to redecorate, or take a huge apartment that you can't afford. Is that one? A problem also, though, is that the court will tell couples getting divorced, well, the best way, and experts as well, not just the court, psychologists, therapists, say the best way to prevent damage for the children is that the parents should live no more than 10 minutes apart, 50-50, and that tremendously impacts and limits a person's ability to lower their budget and to cut costs. Because if you're renting an apartment, you were living together in Baka, right, an expensive neighborhood in Yerushalayim, and you sold the house, well, and we'll get to that shortly. So you sold your house and you only have half of the house minus the mortgage, minus all the debt that you have. You can't afford to eat through that money to rent an apartment in Baka, right? So that means that you have to move outside. Not that anyone could afford anything outside either. No one's going to move to Dimona. You can't move to Dimona because your kids are in school in Yerushalayim. So it tremendous puts a limit. Okay, another question. When would you recommend that a person open up their own bank account?
So as far as I understand from the Israeli law, if a couple has been working and they've had joint assets, that it doesn't really matter if I open my own bank account and put my salary in, it's still considered part of the joint assets.
That's correct. Until the what's called the moed hakera, the date of the demise of the marriage, the death date of the marriage.
Exactly. So if someone's considering divorce, they could open an account just not to protect their money and then have some money, because again, as we're saying, it's still part of the joint couple's money, but more just to know, okay, I have an account so that after this happens, I have where to get money into and somewhere to run my, business from. So I think when someone thinks they're getting divorced, I think that is the time definitely to open that account, even if the process takes a while, just to establish an account and have some money there and, and that kind of thing.
Okay. Going back to pre-marriage, right? What would you recommend from a financial, and I'll talk about the legal aspect afterwards, from a financial perspective to make sure goes into a prenup?
So, listen, when you're talking about a couple, let's say who are young and, don't have any money, getting married, young, don't really have any money. There's not really much to go in. When we're talking about something either later on, either let's just take an example of one side wants to help their kid and give them a down payment for an apartment. Okay, the other side isn't. So it's possible that that side, there could be a prenup or post-nup by that point if it's being written
Right.
afterwards. Or they could, I mean, they need to obviously consult with a lawyer, but the parents could say this is actually in effect a loan for 10 years. And then if they get married after a year, they haven't lost out on the money because it was a loan. The couple owed it back and it's not part of, what the court would decide is being split. So there are different tools, not just the prenup, that, I definitely suggest when there's larger sums of money that people discuss. Another time that things come up is, let's say, when someone inherits money. So you're married, you inherit money, you're about to inherit a large sum of money, and your relationship is shaky as it is, and you're like, I just don't want to share this. So my understanding, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is the law in Israel is if I were to take it into my account on my name and not share it, then that is mine because it's an inheritance. So again, there it might not
That's a very
necessarily need a
important point
prenup.
because according to Chok Yachasei Mamon, the law of relations of money within a marriage, so inheritance is something which belongs only to the person who inherited. It is not community or joint property in any sense. However, though, the minute it enters into a joint account or a house is purchased together with that money, an asset or a brokerage account is open and it's put on both spouses' names, and I've had a lot of litigation on this, it becomes joint property, almost always.
Exactly. So something like that, I think people need to be aware of. And, it doesn't really, your prenup question is, yes, if there are things that might come up, whatever, people should have a prenup. And then there are case by case, like what's happening, who's, where's the money from? But in general, people should understand that when we're making money together, then it's joint money. Even if I, had a great business deal and made $1 million and then decide to get divorced, that $1 million is shared, unless again, there was something saying that it wasn't. So people need to be aware of that and consider a prenup in the cases that it's necessary.
Rivka, you made a really good point. When gifting children money, like a down payment for a house, so there are some parents, halavai on all of us, that we buy our children apartments, etc., that it's very important to give that gift in a way that if God forbid the marriage ends, that there's a way for your child to get that money back, that it's their asset or your asset. It goes back to you. So what you said about the loan is very important, that it's written up as a loan. And that loan is, and it's not just written up, but it's actually notarized by a notary or by a lawyer, that it's completely official, because that could come back to haunt, God forbid, when we marry off our children and we help them and we want to help them. And I find that most people don't want to talk about a prenup. Even though I think it's very important from a halachic aspect and from a legal aspect, if people think it's the most unromantic thing you could possibly do. So really a ketubah is a prenup. It's a financial arrangement. Okay, right? So it's not like a prenup is something foreign to Jews. We've had prenups before there was a prenuptial agreement in the legal system. And that's a very important point. And there's other ways also, like you said, of ensuring that the property and the asset or the money that one of the sides invested in the asset is maintained. And that would be something to really consult. I recommend that to everyone. Before you give your children a big gift, protect it also. You want it to work out, but in the chas v'shalom case, it doesn't work out. You want it to work out better for your child.
I'll add here that, like, when it's come up, let's say for clients of mine or whatever, they've done, let's say this is a loan, but assuming the couple are married in 10 years, everything's good, it's forgiven. It's not like really a loan. Like if they're 80 years old and they go to sell, they don't need to go find, start paying back. It's like more of a like short-term thing in place, because otherwise it doesn't feel nice. Like, what, they don't trust? Yeah, you know what? I'm protecting for the short term. Of course, if you stay married, then of course it's yours. But yeah, it doesn't feel nice. I hear that. On the other hand, people do want to protect themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that, it's a loan. The way that I write documents sometimes is, the loan, if God forbid, or when 120 comes and the lenders pass, then the loan needs to be paid to the child of the lenders. So that way, I do a lot of divorces that are people over 20 years, over 30 years, sometimes over 50 years. I have one case right now open. They're married for over 50 years.
Wow.
And they're getting divorced now, and they're fighting over their, of course, all the assets. So there's a lot of statistics that I'll take them from the United States. I don't know statistics here in Israel. There have been many studies that report that post-divorce men have a 20% salary decrease, and post-divorce women have a 45% salary decrease, which is a huge earning gap. How can a person who's going through divorce, which is costing them a fortune of money, right? The average divorce in Israel costs almost 100,000 shekels, which is like insane. So it's really cost 200,000 shekels because you have two parties paying that kind of money, which they could put in their kids' trust fund so that the kid could buy an apartment. But in any event, so how does a person budget and save for the future when they can barely make it through the month? They make it through the month.
So we're addressing the people that can't make it through the month, right? Because you said there are different
middle
types
class
of people.
to poverty, right?
It's really, really hard. Meaning divorce is extremely hard. This is not going to be easy. There's a huge adjustment on every level, emotional and financial. And, this is a less than ideal situation. And I think just even recognizing that, like, this is a less than ideal situation, and it might take absolute heroic effort. But if you are not making it through the month, like you're saying here, we're talking to the people who are not making it through the month, and you don't want that to be your reality for the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years, then I think this heroic effort that it's going to take needs to be you saying, I don't want to be in this trajectory forever. Like, I'm not accepting this. Yes, I prefer to be divorced than to be married. I'm not in a good marriage. This is my new reality, but my new reality might mean that I need to retrain. I need to do something different, meaning there are jobs that pay more, probably, meaning you're talking about people that can't make it. So I'm imagining that there's some other way where this is not static. This is not set in stone. You can't make it. You're in the poverty, under the poverty line. I'm a big believer in we can totally change that. But when you're talking about someone who's going through a divorce, that is like beyond heroic to be able to get up and say, despite everything that's going on the emotional level, on the financial level, and whatever level, and the kids, and there's so much going on, to get up and say, I'm not accepting that for the rest of my life, I am living in poverty. And I am going to, instead of struggling for the next, let's just say 40 years financially, I'm going to do something really difficult for 2 years, let's say, to move profession, to change my trajectory, position myself to be the next person to get a raise in my company because I took courses, because I did the right things, because I gave the extra mile. But you have to have it in you to give the extra mile. And that's where it's really challenging. And I don't have an answer to that one, because I've seen, like, when you're going through so much, it's difficult to give the extra mile, to give the extra mile possibly to your kids if you have kids. And, there's so many new things going on. But I'm just bringing that up.
I just want to say on that note that what you're saying is so true. And what a lot of men and women feel, though, is that when they do give to themselves, like they do give themselves that course, it energizes them because they feel that wow, I'm making changes. I am able to now have somewhat control over my finances, over myself. I can go out and enjoy a course.
Exactly. It makes a huge difference. And even the thought process to begin with of like, I'm not accepting the fact that this is all I can earn. I'm going to make that change. And it might be so difficult for a couple of years. But opening that side gig, positioning yourself for the next promotion, moving profession, it's all doable.
It is. I did it. That's what I did.
I did it too, actually. I did
Yeah.
a degree when I was 30 and had 2 small kids and was pregnant with my third. That's when I did my degree. I did my CFP course years later also. Like, I'm not the same as I was with the same earning power when I was in my 20s.
Right.
I looked around, I said, I want to do this financial thing. I need to be that. I need to change. I need to move
It was
forward.
really hard. It was really, really hard. It was really hard. And I have to say though that I was spoiled, because even though I was a single mom of 7 kids going back to school, I had a lot of support. I had a lot of friends who would show up with dinner and, you know, just like surprise me with, you know, oh, pot of soup. Like I had a lot of support. Not, you know, not everyone has. I have, a Baruch Hashem, the best friends in the world. But and even with that, it was really hard. It was really,
Really
really hard.
I'm not belittling that, and kol hakavod to you for doing that.
It was worth it. And even
incredible.
during the process, it gave me a good feeling here. I can actually do something for myself that is going to, it's not just for me, it's going to better my family situation. It's going to better my financial situation. It's going to lower the stress eventually, right? Now it's a little tight and it was really hard, and paying for school is really hard. But I just want to mention that in terms of support, there are a number of programs through Yad Eliezer, through Kemach, through some Iriyot, Iriyat Beit Shemesh, Iriyat Yerushalayim, Iriyat Bnei Brak, which have special programs, more for divorced women, although Kemach has a male counterpart, Temach, which they will help divorced women go through school. They will give them a manak, a monthly grant also to help them not just pay for their school, but give them a grant. And I know many women who have found new professions through this, and it was very hard, even with the grant, but it made a huge impact.
Right, like it was 2 years or 4 years, whatever it was, that were really hard, but you changed the trajectory. Instead of knowing, oh, there's 40 hard years, I'm not saying it's easier afterwards, but not saying it's totally easy, but there are really hard years, and then it gets easier because you've changed your path.
You know, it reminds me the way you're speaking of the dream of the dream of Paro. You know, the fat cows and the skinny cows, and Yosef's interpretation that we gotta fill the storage house during the fat years so we can have something for the skinny years.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. That was really very insightful. So what budgeting tips in general can you give for single parents?
So I think the number one thing is to have a budget, like to know you have a budget. It sounds so basic and so simple, but like so many people just don't have a budget. They're just going through the days. And I would say have a budget even if you have a lot of money, because I've met, not so long ago, I met a divorced woman who's really running through her money way faster than she can afford to. And I'm like, okay, we need to like have a budget. We need to have a number, because you think, oh, it's a large sum of money and therefore, you know, I can do whatever. You can do a lot, but you can't do everything. And it was a real eye-opener. It's like, okay, you know, I'm like, you would run out of money. I think I ran the projection at 82. You don't want to run out of money at 82. We want to know there's money for the rest of your life. Here's how you do it. So I think having that budget, having a real sense of what you can spend, what you can allow yourself to spend, what you know, where your priorities are, prioritizing, like you said before, like spoiling the kids, making my house the fun one, or whoever's house it is. And I think that's just really important to like make sure those things that are important to you are in that budget. And I'll also comment on the fact that a lot of times, even for people that were very comfortable pre-divorce, post-divorce, they need to make some adjustments to lifestyle.
Yeah, that's hard.
And a lot of times I'll see that that's really hard for parents to do to their kids. It's one thing to do it to yourself. It's very hard for parents to do to their kids. And then they get very stressed about it because they're spending, oh, the kid's used to doing this and kids used to that. And like, sometimes in a bad situation, bad being getting divorced is less than ideal situation for the kids. you do need to make these adjustments. And I think that's a budgeting tip in a certain sense. Like, yes, you need to, if you've got kids, you need to put them into the budget. You need to, you know, put whatever you're doing into the budget for them. But don't make yourself bankrupt because you wanted to do that. So really be on top of that budget. I think is really my tip.
Okay, great. Is there a certain app you use? Do you recommend for people who want to budget? I know there's all these great, I mean, they claim to be great apps. I don't use them. I'm very old fashioned.
I don't use apps personally. I know that some of my clients really like Rise Up. YNAB is very popular, which is you need a budget. Those are popular. I personally don't use that because I have a really simple system that I teach my clients. But absolutely, if an app's going to help you, then you should use an app.
Okay. So going back to that spectrum, let's go to the wealth side of the spectrum. Okay. You have many people who walk away from a divorce settlement, which made it necessary, selling one property which they owned. A couple who owned one house, they had to sell it and they split it. Okay. So now they're each left with the value of half the property minus all the debt, which was affiliated with that property. So let's say somebody sold a house and they're left with now 800,000 shekels or 1,000,000 shekels, which is not enough to buy another property. Depending on what the person's monthly salary is, they're the single parent, is very difficult to get a mortgage. Okay, even if they have a decent tlush, they very often, monthly salary, they often can't get a mortgage with just one person bringing in one income. What would you recommend them doing with that money?
So I'd recommend being cautious of friends with different investments and being cautious of the new business ideas and all sorts of things. I'd go for the really standard, you know, stocks and bonds, something that's done with a licensed professional, either via the bank or one of the big investment companies. Risk level can be adjusted to what the person's needs are. You know, if it's lower risk, it might be more bonds, or if it's higher risk, it's something that people can understand, that they've been doing for many, many years, that's out there. I hate to see it when someone makes a mistake because like they saw this little ad in the paper for something and then they lost their money. And like, this is significant. And I would say like a standard stock and bond portfolio with a licensed professional is probably the best way to go for people.
Okay. So steady and known. Nothing, yeah. Right? Yeah. Do you recommend a waiting period between, you know, divorce really is very upheavals the person's life and is very emotional. Do you recommend a waiting period before making any big decisions with money?
Yes, definitely. I think that, you know, when I've worked with people who've like inherited huge sums of money that they didn't expect, and like 6 months to a year of waiting, whether they might be planning during it, is ideal. And I think it's the same here. Like, give yourself 6 months, see what life's costing you, see what's going on. Don't make rash decisions. I think that's so important. Whenever there's a huge financial change, it can be divorce, it can be inheriting a large sum of money. Give yourself time, but not too much time. You know, I'll meet people and like, well, for 5 years it sat in the bank, and you're like, okay, and you didn't make any interest, you didn't even keep up with inflation. Right. No. So like, not too long, but yeah, give yourself time. There's a lot of changes. There's a lot going on with divorce, and absolutely give yourself, let's say 6 months, something like that. But again, it depends on each person's situation. Sometimes someone's divorce is dragging out, and sometimes getting a job is dragging out. You know, it really depends what it is. But definitely give yourself time.
Okay. Great. So going back to the actual divorce, how can I be sure which documents I need to ask for? Like, if I'm the party who's in the dark, okay, so obviously I want a tzav gilui, you know, if I feel the other side is not being honest, I want an order from the court which demands that they hand over discovery. It's a little bit different than discovery in the legal American term, but the same idea. But within that demand, like somebody, how do I get those documents?
So
and what are
I
the
think-
best documents for me to get?
So I think that when it comes to like Israeli pensions and Keren Ishtalmut and on accounts and whatever, there's Harakesef, which you can log in with a Teudat Zehut number and see where people have money, and you can see where yourself have money and your spouse. And regarding the other documents, like I had a client not so long ago whose husband had hid money abroad. He made money abroad and he only brought part over and he was hiding money abroad. And I honestly do not know what they could have done to prove that. They were fighting it when they met me. I don't know what happened with that, but
It's complicated because
it
the
is
courts here don't
definitely
have jurisdiction
complicated. And
over bank
really,
accounts in Chutzlaretz.
yeah, and really that net worth statement of knowing when you are married and when things are good, of like a list of everything you have and sort of trusting like this is actually what we have and what's going on, is so important. I prepare one for me and my husband every year, and see how much, what's grown, what's moved. And like, we both know what's going on with our finances. And I think like every couple should have that. Obviously you're talking about later on where a couple's not getting along and they don't have it. But I'm saying if anyone's listening and they're not at that stage, yeah, have a net worth, have a statement of what you have, because you're right. Otherwise, it's much more difficult to track, and the lawyer has to go and get reports and try.
It's not even at that point. It's not a lawyer. It's a forensic accountant or a private detective.
Could be, exactly,
and that's very, very costly, and often they can't find it because let's say like you have Bitcoin and all those virtual currencies. Those are almost impossible to track, which is why they're attractive for people who want to hide money.
Yeah.
It's also, you can't even, there's no record of it really. And no one else can access it. It's very, you could put it under somebody else's name because you really just need the passcode. Like it's all very, very complicated. Very complicated. But one of the things that I think is really important, this is something that I teach my clients who come to me with very little financial knowledge, and that is we make a portfolio. And the way the portfolio is all of the documents that you need, the matzav yishur zchuyot, that you own your house, who owns what percentage of the house, it's in there, or tabo if you have that. Going through that to the birth certificates of the children, the marriage license. There are so many documents that a person needs, right? And to have a thick portfolio with the plastic sheets and start tax returns, for example. If you do American tax returns, that's a great window into what's really going on, including foreign accounts. Because even though a lot of people hide their foreign accounts from the IRS as well, it's much more difficult to hide money from the IRS than it is to hide money from Mas Hachnasa. America has reciprocity, which with many more countries than Israel does in terms of revealing and sharing information. So it's complicated, but I think it goes back to the first thing that you spoke about, and that was the more you know, the better off you are. And that being able to share information is the normal and correct way of having a marriage. You're partners. So you're partners in creating a family. You're also partners in your business of your family, which is a very foreign idea to many people who are in really bad marriages where there's one party. I don't want to use the term financial abuse because financial abuse is different. There's one party who completely controls the money, which maybe that is financial abuse, but there's one party who completely controls the money and the other party who's in the dark. And there's no reason for either a man or a woman to be in the dark about anything. Just like if your kid was having a medical issue, you don't want to be in the dark. You share that information. You share information about money.
I mean, I wouldn't say that someone taking control or care of the finances is anything like a financial abuse. Like it's just the breakdown in a family. Like, I take care of all the shopping. My husband takes care of all the cooking. I take care of all the carpools. My husband takes care of.
I'm glad you mentioned that because I didn't mean like someone who takes care. I mean someone who controls it and is like, if you want 50 shekels to go buy whatever, you have to ask or beg or plead or steal it. Okay. Well, it's not really stealing because it's your money, but in other words, take it in a way which the other person behind their back that they don't know. And then you have opposite financial abuse as well. you have, and I've seen this a lot. I've seen, men who go out and they make money and they make enough money to support their family, but no extra. And you have a woman who will constantly use the credit card, right, behind her husband's back, spend out of the budget, and spend and incur debt and debt and debt. And that is just as much as financial abuse to a certain extent as not giving, right? So I think my idea of financial abuse is when these decisions are not made together. And if you can't make these decisions together, you go to a financial planner, you go to a third party, and you work it out about how we're going to have a budget, keep a budget. And sometimes you have one party who's unreasonably stingy. That has to be worked out. But it's a partnership. And when when there's a power struggle instead of a partnership, that's when abuse comes in. That's
a few years ago, I wrote an article about financial abuse, actually, when there was a law being talked about in Israel about financial abuse. And I interviewed a number of people who'd been through financial abuse. And it was just very, very fascinating because I asked them, one of the questions I asked was, did you see signs of this before you got married? And the answer was yes in every case. Well, I didn't realize it was abuse, but I understood they were extremely stingy. I didn't realize it was abuse, but he was going to take care of me, was one of the lady's words. And she's like, it just felt so cared for, and that's what I needed. But it was actually abusive. Like, she couldn't get 50 shekels, she couldn't buy stuff, like really.
Wow.
And it's topic on its own, the financial abuse. And I truly, like, it's definitely out there. There are definitely people who suffer very much by someone else, again, controlling, not that they're in charge.
Right.
That's fine if the one person's in charge. That works well for many couples. As naturally, I take care of the finances in our family, but I don't control it. It's my responsibility, and he has other responsibilities. So if it's a normal breakdown and everyone has access to information and access to money, and we're making decisions together and can talk about it, that's wonderful. But again, you're right. Like, if someone feels like, I don't have access to my own money, and even if the other partner is making it, it's our money in a relationship.
It's our money. It's a partnership.
And I don't have access, not because we really can't afford it, but because they're being tight with it, or they're feeling they need to control it or control me. That already is things that definitely need to be addressed.
Right. And it's interesting because in halacha, financial abuse is a reason for divorce. I mean, the halacha's version of financial abuse, right, is a reason to divorce. And the Rambam, we don't paskin according to the Rambam, but the Rambam actually has a ruling. In this case, usually we do paskin according to the Rambam, but in this topic, we don't. The Rambam has a ruling that if a husband does not provide a certain minimum of support for his wife, even if the woman is working and making her own money, we forced him to give her a get. Forced him, which is very, very rare. So the idea of, to me, that's a very interesting psak, and that's recognizing financial abuse for what it is, that a marriage cannot work like this. It just can't. So we don't force people today. Okay, that's not, we very rarely force anyone today. But and even the Shulchan Aruch, who almost always paskins like the Rambam, does not hold like the Rambam in this instance. But it's just a fascinating idea. It's a fascinating concept that this is what a husband is obligated towards his wife. Even if she has her own source of income, he still needs to provide her because it's a partnership, which is very interesting.
Interesting.
So okay, we spoke about tracking expenses. You have a method that, is it written in your book, or is it something you teach your clients?
The book's about Israeli banking. It's how the banking system works.
It's not about budgeting.
No.
Is that an upcoming book?
Maybe.
It's not like we can clip coupons here from the Sunday paper, right?
Oh, no.
It's very hard. You have people who will go to, 2 or 3 different supermarkets and write down how much it costs, how much cottage cheese is this week in the supermarket, or how much the peppers are and the onions are, and then go back again and buy everything in the cheapest way. And the problem is, when you're a single parent, you can't do that. You don't have that kind of time. You don't have that kind of time resource to do those kinds of things. So I think we got like a lot of information here. I got a lot of information. Our listeners got a lot of information. And I think it all boils down, if we could put it into, fold everything we said into one word today, I think it's knowledge and knowing what you have, what you don't have, knowing what your debts are. That's something we didn't discuss, but I find that when I get a couple to a divorce, when I'm doing a mediation, all of a sudden, like a couple days before we're about to finish the agreement, all of a sudden they have these huge debts, right? Which pop up from nowhere. Like, where did this come from? I've had clients with huge debts of almost 2 million shekels, which, unfortunately, those who travel in the gemach route, and maybe you want to say something about that. When somebody does need a loan, what should they make sure that they have? Or where do they take the loan from? And how do they know that they can really actually pay the loan off?
So if someone, I mean, in general, I don't recommend loans unless people can genuinely afford them. Meaning it sometimes makes sense to take a loan, let's say for a car. It does not make sense to take a loan for your monthly spending, because how are you going to pay it back? If you can't afford what you're buying, you shouldn't be buying it. So I'd really, really be hesitant for loans. You're talking again about the spectrum of people who can't afford things, not the people who have lots of money and want to take a loan, because why should they take the money out of an investment? They'd prefer to take a loan. That's a different story. But if you're talking about the people who really can't afford things and they're running to Gemach for a loan, that to me is a red flag. Stop right here. If you can't afford whatever it is, if you can't put it in your budget, and I said in this talk, in our chat here, how important it is to have a budget and know what you have. If you can't fit paying for this item in your budget, either monthly or as a lump sum, then that's a red flag. You need to stop and think, what's happening here? Because let's just say I don't have room for that. I don't know. I need 10,000 shekel for something. Okay. So I could say, okay, I will save 1,000 shekel a month for the 10,000 shekel. And in 10 months, I can spend the money. Okay. But if I look at it and say to myself, well, I can't afford the 1,000 shekel a month, so I can't save the 10,000, but I go borrow it. Well, how am I repaying it? I need the same 1,000 a month to do that. So generally, we're getting people in, especially when they're going to gemachs like that, they're getting into a cycle of making their financial situation worse. They're putting a bandage on something that's sinking, that's not going to help. We need to stop and see what we could do if all the gemachs had said, no, there is no way to borrow money. Okay, what would we do? What are other options? Because I mean, this is what I've seen, people borrow money and then they need to borrow more money to pay back that money, and they get into the cycle, and it's not a good cycle.
In America, people do it with credit cards. In Israel, we do it with gemachim.
Yeah, I mean, I'm honestly, I'm less familiar with the whole gemach world, but I see it from loans. Like when I worked in a bank, like people chasing their loans and their overdrafts, and it doesn't work. There are occasional times where really, I know I'm getting a raise at work. I know I'm getting whatever. I need to pay for something now, but I'm confident I'll be able to pay it back. No problem. 1,000 shekel a month is just an example, and I can do it. But if I'm doing it from a place of I really can't, we need to think of another solution, because otherwise you're getting yourself into a much worse place, and you're going to be stressed. It doesn't help when people are divorced and they're stressed as it is with the whole situation and with their kids and whatever, they're stressed for their kids with this change. Taking loans and getting more stressed over it, it's there. The kids are going to feel it. They're going to feel it. It's really not helpful. So I'm saying to anyone who's thinking of doing this kind of thing, stop in your tracks. Imagine you couldn't do that. What would happen? What would you do? Because and you meet people sometimes with just so many loans that they can't catch up. It's not possible. So then what would
and then
you
they
do?
take another loan to cover those loans.
Yeah, and at some point it stops. At some point you get a no. So I'm saying bring that no forward. Say, imagine I'm getting a no now. What would I do? What would I do? And also when people have debt and loans, they're less likely to open a business, to move job, because they need what they have. They like cling on to what they have. And when someone doesn't have debt, they have a little more confidence to be like, well, I could look for a new job, because they're not clinging as much to what they have because of the debts. So I would really, really be cautious when it comes to taking loans.
Okay, thank you so much. And again, I think everything folds into one word, knowledge. You have to know what you have, what you don't have, what's coming in, income, outcome. Knowing that seems to be the key to being able, even for those in the poverty section and the middle class section, to be able to change the trajectory. No. All right, knowledge. Thank you so much, Rivka.
Thank you.
And I look forward to reading your new book on budgeting.
Thank you.
Okay, Batzlacha. Thank you so much.